You're also on the board of Palantir, and I'm wondering, given that the stock is still flat, do you think that a direct listing was the right way to go versus a traditional IPO or some other alternative?
I do think a direct listing was the right path for Palantir. Palantir had plenty of cash on the balance sheet at the time of the IPO, so it didn't need to raise primary capital in the IPO. Therefore, it didn't need to pursue a traditional listing. If they had pursued a traditional listing, the stock would have traded up quite a bit and they would have left money on the table. There would have been excess dilution to the VCs, the employees, and early investors. So a direct listing was the right solution for Palantir. That having been said, I think if companies of Palantir's quality go public in 6, 12, 18 months from now, they'll more seriously consider going public through a SPAC merger, because now there are more high quality SPAC sponsor groups out there that can take public companies of Palantir's caliber.
Meantime, we've got a big election coming up. Now that you've got a few dogs in the fight, will the results of the election have a dramatic impact on markets and market sentiment? Are you preparing for that?
Well, the most important thing is stability. So whoever wins, let's just hope it is just resolved and decided relatively quickly and peacefully. I think that's the thing the markets most importantly need. I'll take stability over either winner any day. So that's the big hope, I think, for the markets.
That said, you also just launched a new housing startup, and I'm curious how you think the pandemic is going to permanently change human behavior when it comes to buying and selling real estate.
It's changing quite a lot. So people are no longer tethered to their corporate headquarters. They can now live and work where they choose, or at least a lot of people. And that's changing purchasing behavior for real estate, to be sure. So my startup Picasso, for example, is allowing people to buy portions of second homes. And that allows them to sort of right size their ownership of a vacation home. And a lot of people are taking advantage of this because they're able to live and work where they choose. So the other big change that's happening in real estate is people are going to spread out from major cities. If they don't have to work in their corporate headquarters 5 days a week, and they can commute in, say, 1 day a week or 1 day every couple weeks, then they can live 45 minutes, an hour, and even an hour and a half. And all of a sudden you'll see people sprawling out of major cities and getting more house for less money further away from city centers.
So how do you see prices evolving through the fall and into the spring, given we have an election, we might not have a vaccine, and some things are changing potentially permanently?
Well, you're seeing already rents, for example, in some cities like New York and San Francisco drop like a rock. I mean, the data that we're seeing out of San Francisco is 20+% rent declines as people realize that they don't have to just be in San Francisco to work in tech. They can be in other cities. And then, usually the winter, the sort of between Thanksgiving and the Super Bowl is a very quiet time for real estate transactions, and everything sort of settles and most people don't move during that time. We'll see if that happens in this particular case also, but those are the impacts that I think you're seeing from COVID and this urban sprawl and kind of more flexible live work situation where people are working from more remote destinations. I think that's permanent. I don't see companies going back to 5 day a week in the office situations.
Now, you've been in the tech industry a long time. The DOJ just filed a huge antitrust lawsuit against Google. I'm sure at Zillow you depended on Google for traffic. You've also been on the board of TripAdvisor. Do you think Google is an antitrust problem? Do you think it's anti-competitive?
That's a tricky one. Google definitely biases their search results to favor their own properties. And that makes it very difficult for startups to be seen in what is basically the homepage of the internet. And it makes it hard for big companies like TripAdvisor or Zillow to be seen when Google puts their own products up high in the search results. So there's no question that makes it difficult to compete. The question is, does that actually constitute anti-competitive behavior? Because typically the government and courts require some harm to be caused to a consumer in order for it to be deemed anti-competitive. And it's hard to argue, what is the consumer harm if they're seeing Google hotel search results rather than TripAdvisor hotel search results? What's the consumer harm? We of course know there's a harm to TripAdvisor or to startups, but where's the consumer harm? So I don't know where the courts will settle on this, but clearly it's something that tech is watching closely. As a startup investor, it's very important to me and startups to try to be discovered in Google. But we'll have to see how the courts determine this. Of course, let's remember, this is still years away. The lawsuit has just been filed. So this is 2+ years away when we might see any kind of settlement. The more immediate issue that Google and others should be watching is what impact it has on the company culture at Google. I ran Zillow for a very long time, sort of in the shadow of Microsoft in Seattle, and we hired a lot of people from Microsoft. And if you ask people who worked at Microsoft in the mid 90s to the mid 2000s, what happened to Microsoft? Why did Microsoft lose its way for a long period of time? They'll say it was the shadow of the antitrust case against Microsoft that stifled innovation. It made Microsoft less aggressive, less willing to try new things, less willing to launch new products. And it was that, not the specific outcome of the case, not the actual settlement with the DOJ, that really harmed Microsoft for the long term, and was constitute basically a lost decade of Microsoft, from which it's now recovered. It was the impact on the company culture. So that's what I'll be watching at Google.